So the focus today is going to be on the diaphragm, which is really important right now for all of us. I think so many people right now are feeling a lot of stress with the uncertainty that's going on in the world, and the diaphragm is so important to have it being able to flow and move properly and to allow the rib cage to expand in all directions. So it's a fascinating muscle. It's the biggest muscle in the body. There, in terms of traditional Chinese medicine, the 14 meridians all go through the diaphragm. So it's really important energetically, and it's kind of at the solar plexus. So I'm gonna show you guys a little picture, because last week we worked with the psoas muscle. If you remember that, this is the psoas muscle that connects into the lumbar spine and then kind of flows through the pelvis and connects at the inner femur. And then we have the dome of the diaphragm, and you can see that the diaphragm connects in to the, let's see, is that good? Can you see? All right. The diaphragm connects in right at the solar plexus. The ligament that holds it to the spine is right there at the same juncture as the psoas muscles. And so as we breathe, when we inhale, and sometimes our breathing can get reversed, or we're holding our breath because we're in this nervous tension pattern. But when we breathe, on the inhalation, the diaphragm actually descends from that kind of domed position, and it kind of flattens out. So it descends towards the lower edges of the ribs. So let me push this away a little bit. The lower edges of the ribs for me are about right here. Then I can kind of follow the edge of it up to where it V's and attaches to the sternum here. And so the dome kind of domes up into here, and then it flattens out more towards the lower part of the ribs. So that's called the zone of apposition. And I may throw that word out there eventually, but it doesn't really matter. It's just the positioning of where the diaphragm raises and lowers. So when we inhale, it starts in that domed position, it lowers down and kind of pushes on the contents of the lower belly. And then as we, the diaphragm itself massages the insertion points of the psoas muscle on each side of the spine where they attach. So they're really connected. They're connected in with the parasympathetic nervous system and that whole fight or flight response. And so we're going to be working with that. And I want to start out before we're going to start in constructive rest pose on the floor. But before we do that, I want us to take a minute to find on ourselves just about the distance apart from your finger and thumb. There's like two little tips of ribs there. And we're going to work with trying to kind of draw those 2 points together toward the midline of the body. And so we would do that on an exhalation. And we can use that or a whoo breath, either one, to kind of contract that muscle. And then releasing when we inhale, noticing that those ribs gently move apart from each other and the whole rib cage is expanding. We're going to get to that part in a minute, but I want us to feel this muscle here. It's one of the major core muscles that is attached right here and also down at the pubic bone. So just breathe at your own natural rhythm for a moment and feel the motion of the rib cage at that particular point of the solar plexus. And then if we try to engage that muscle there between the two fingers, to draw those fingers just gently together, we're not going to crunch and kind of move forward. We're just going to gently draw, maybe with 10% effort, draw those ribs together and notice if you feel almost a whole internal girdling there through the lower part of the rib cage. And you can yes or no, or does anybody feel that a little bit? Okay. It's a very subtle movement. So the cue I also like to use is taking the fingers just on the low ribs, and on the exhalation, trying to knit the ribs together by toning that muscle there. And we're going to go into constructive rest pose in a minute, and we're going to be working with toning the frontal hip points together like we did last week, and then toning the ribs together, and kind of just feeling how that changes with the breath and how the breath feels in the body as we do that. So we're going to use our strap like we did. We'll set up for our constructive rest pose, but if you have a strap or any kind of belt or anything like a necktie, something like that, Patricia, that would be helpful. I'm going to rearrange here a little bit. And so for constructive rest pose, I like to have my base blanket down with the all the way at the headward end of the mat. And I like to take a second blanket and have that, I don't like the way that one's folded. I like to have that at the head so that my neck and shoulders have some support. And I'll put my other two blankets over here. I'm going to have blocks handy. I'm going to have my strap handy. And I'm going to move the camera away a little bit so that hopefully you guys can see. There, hopefully you can see. And if you can't see, unmute and let me know, okay? So let's take that strap and we're going to wrap it around behind us, just the tail end of it, so that we can place it at the base of the ribs and wrap it around. So we did this in a different position last week. We're going to use that with our constructive rest pose to help us feel the rib cage as it expands. So to come into our constructive rest pose, we can just bring our hands behind the knees. We can have that strap just kind of draped over the arms, and we'll scoop in the low belly as we allow ourselves to come back down onto the mat. Move that out of the way. All right, so you might have to adjust your strap a little bit. And this is not here for any purpose other than to just give us a little bit of proprioceptive feedback so that we know where our ribs are in space. So you don't want to pull it tight and have your back arched. We don't want to have the pelvis tilted so that the low back is flat. We want to have a little bit of a curvature in there that's just a very neutral position, and where the frontal hip points and the front of the pubic bone are all on the same plane. So that's our positioning for the pelvis. We want the bottom fold of the headward blanket just brushing the tops of the shoulders so that we have support for the neck and head. And then we'll bring our strap to that low rib position and just gently hold it there. And there's really no tension. It's like grazing the skin so that we can feel that. And we'll just begin to take some nice natural breath. Noticing if you can feel the breath in the back of the body and in the sides of the body, and you'll be able to feel it move toward the strap. So just notice that. And if you're not really getting much sensation there, you can lay the strap to the sides, take your fingers and thumb, with your thumb at the back of the low ribs and the fingers wrapped around the front of the ribs. And let's try a few breaths in this hand position, just noticing if you get a little more feedback this way. So ideally, our rib cage is free and all of the little intercostal muscles that run between the ribs and all of the core muscles are flexible and moving. And when we breathe, we can feel the rib cage expanding forward, expanding backwards towards the floor, and also to the sides into our hands. But we've all been walking around on this earth for a while, and maybe we're not in as free in the ribs as we would like to be, or maybe one side is different from the other. But just take a moment to notice how that feels right now for you. And then we'll try to check in again at the end of the practice and see if anything has changed with that. So let's move into trying that breathing with the WHO breath and knitting those front ribs together. So you can move the fingertips towards those points on the ribs that we were working with a minute ago. And on the inhalation, we just allow that expansion. On the exhalation, we can use the breath to help us contract and knit those ribs together. Inhaling and releasing. Exhaling with a inhaling, releasing. Or you could try a shh on the exhalation and try knitting the ribs with that. And it's interesting, in this position, you may be able to feel that muscle toning a little bit better than you could in a seated position. Everybody's different, and so it's just kind of interesting to play with our sensory input and what we can notice about our own bodies. Let's drop down to the frontal hip points, and you can rest your fingertips there, or I actually like to rest the heel of the hand on the frontal hip points with the fingertips kind of pointing down towards the pubic bone. And we'll do the same thing with the WHO or the sh breath on the exhalation and draw the frontal hip points together just ever so slightly. So we're gently contracting that muscle in the lower abdomen as we inhaling, releasing that contraction. Exhaling, drawing the hips together. Releasing on the inhale. And just do a couple of those at your own pace. Noticing if you can feel that engagement of that lower abdomen on the exhalation. Releasing on the inhalation. And on the next exhalation, we're going to do the sh breath and draw the frontal hip points and knit the rib cage together at the same time. So inhaling and then exhaling. Releasing. And it might be helpful if you want to put one hand on the low belly and one hand at the solar plexus, and try that again after a nice inhalation, exhaling. Engaging those core muscles and drawing towards the midline of the body. Releasing and relaxing on the inhalation. And try that for a couple rounds of breath. We're going to add one more thing. So this time, after the exhalation, the shh breath, and contracting those two areas, we're going to zip up the low belly. So in other words, on the inhalation, we're going to do a motion as though we're zipping up our favorite pair of skinny jeans. So we're drawing from the pubic bone all the way towards the navel. So we're kind of scooping that whole area up. So let's try that. Take a nice inhalation. Exhaling, contracting with the maintaining that contraction there, and then scooping the low belly on the inhalation. And then maintaining all of those muscle engagements and breathing through that. So it changes the shape of the breath a little bit to have all of those core muscles engaged. And we've got all 4 layers of the deep core muscles right now. So just maintain that toning. And breathe. And notice, for me, I notice that I can feel the breath expand in the side ribs more and in the back ribs more, because there's less space for the breath to move into the front ribs because of that muscle engagement.